with another segment. This segment is called Uncovered. Uncovered. This is the information that you need to hear, my people. Let's jump right into it. This is another public announcement from the United States Private Enterprise Free State. 407 300 5377. The boxes were supposed to be burned in 1947. All of them, every document, every photograph, every map that showed cities where official histories says no cities existed. Someone didn't comply. You're standing in a room that shouldn't exist, looking at evidence that was ordered destroyed 77 years ago. The walls are stone, 2 feet thick, and the temperature never changes, 54 degrees, summer or winter. The building has no heating system, never has. The woman showing you this room is 89 years old. Her family has protected this place for 4 generations. She's the last one. No children, no heirs, and she's dying. They told my grandmother it was temporary, she says. Her voice is steady, but her hands shake when she touches the boxes, just until things settled, just until people forgot enough to stop asking questions. She pulls out the photograph. Sophia's toned edges worn, soft from handling. It shows a city skyline, spires and domes, buildings that dwarf anything around them. The photograph is dated 1891. The city is labeled Tartarian Administrative Center. Tartarian Administrative Center. North American Division, right here, y'all. They didn't destroy Tartaria, she says quietly. They hid it, all of it, the buildings, the technology, the people who remembered. They hid it until humanity was ready to find it again. This is it, right here. We are in it right now. She sets the photograph down. Her hands are shaking harder now. I think that time might finally be here. This is the Harmon Archive. This is the Harmon Archive. Harmon Archive. 47 boxes of documents, photographs, and artifacts that were supposed to have been incinerated, burnt, preserved in a building whose own construction defies what we're taught about 19th century engineering, maintained by a family who sacrificed careers, relationships, and in some cases, their lives to protect what's inside. The question isn't whether Tartaria existed. The evidence for that fills these shelves. The question is why it was hidden. Why was Tartaria hidden when we sit in Tartaria right now? Why an entire civilization, its cities, its technology, its people was systematically erased from public memory while being carefully preserved in places like this one. And the question that haunts Eleanor Harmon most: how do you know when humanity is finally ready to remember? The Harmon Archive sits at the end of a private road in northern Vermont, 11 miles from the nearest town. The building itself is the first evidence. It predates the Harmon family's ownership by at least a century, possibly more. The stones fit together without mortar, each one precisely cut to tolerances that Martin Masons say would require laser measurement. The door frames are 8 feet tall, the ceilings 12. Eleanor's grandfather bought the property in 1923, 6 years before the crash. He was looking for somewhere remote, somewhere the boxes could be moved without attention, somewhere with walls thick enough to survive fire, flood, or deliberate destruction. He didn't know what the building was when he bought it. Eleanor says not at first. He just knew it felt right, like it was waiting for something to be kept safe inside it. The main chamber is 30 square feet, no windows. Light comes from fixtures that were added in the 1950s, but the walls have channels carved into them, grooves that run from floor to ceiling in the precise geometric patterns. Eleanor's brother Marcus spent 40 years trying to understand what they were for. He thought they were conduits, she says, for something energy, sound, light. He never figured it out, but he measured them. Every channel is exactly 7.23 centimeters wide. Every single one in a building that's supposedly from the 1840s. The boxes line 3 walls, 47 of them, numbered but not labeled. Eleanor knows what's in each one without checking. She spent her entire adult life with these documents. My grandmother received them in 1947. She says a man came into the house, her house in Boston, before they moved everything here. Government man didn't give his name, gave her a choice. Help destroy evidence of something that never existed, or help preserve it for when it could exist again. She pauses, touches one of the boxes. She chose preservation. So did 53 families across 12 countries. They told her it would be temporary, a few decades until the adjustment period was complete. She's quiet for a long moment. That was 77 years ago. Eleanor Harmon was 6 years old when her grandmother first brought her into this room. She remembers the smell, old paper and stone and something else, something metallic that she's never been able to identify. She remembers her grandmother's voice explaining that some things were too important to be forgotten, even if the world wasn't ready to remember them yet. She told me about the Tartarians when I was 8. Eleanor says, not as a myth, not as legend, as history that had been deliberately suppressed. She showed me the photographs, the architectural drawings, the census records from cities that don't appear on any Martin map. She pulls out a thick folder from box 7. Inside are pages of handwritten names, addresses, occupations. The header reads Resident Registry, Milwaukee Sector, Tartarian Administrative Zone, 1889. 7,000 names, Eleanor says, people with jobs, families, lives, all of them erased from official records by 1893. Not dead, erased, as if they never existed at all. Her voice catches. My grandmother knew some of them, their descendants, I mean people whose grandparents appeared in these registries. People who were told their family history was a lie, that the documents were forgeries, that the memories passed down through generations were just fantasy. She sets the folder down carefully, returns it to its box. The hiding wasn't violent, not usually. It was administrative, systematic, patient. They changed records, demolished buildings, reassigned populations, gave people new histories, and told them to forget the old history of themselves. And most people did. Most people had to, but some families remembered. Some families refused to forget. Eleanor sits down in a wooden chair that's been in this room longer than she's been alive. The light catches her face, and for a moment, You could see the girl she was, the one who first learned that history isn't what happens, it it's what survives. I've spent my whole life waiting, she says quietly, waiting for the moment when we could open these boxes to the world, when humanity would be ready, know what was taken from them, what was hidden in their name. She looks around the room at the evidence stacked floor to ceiling. I think I've been waiting too long. The stone chamber holds its temperature regardless of outside weather, 54 degrees constant. Thomas Brennan remembers the first time he felt the impossible cold. He was 26 years old, a junior archivist with the National Records Administration, and he had been sent to verify the destruction of materials flagged for elimination under a program that officially didn't exist. Cultural continuity protocol, he says. He's 74 now, living in a caretaker's cottage 100 yards from the archive. His hands are steadier than Eleanor's, but his eyes have the same quality, the look of someone who has carried a weight for too long. That's what they called it internally. The official mandate was to ensure narrative consistency in historical documentation, which meant destroying anything that didn't fit the approved version of the past. He came to Vermont in 1976 to confirm that the Harmon materials had been properly incinerated, burnt. Standard verification visit. Instead, he found Eleanor's father sitting in this room surrounded by boxes that should have been ash. He showed me that he showed me what was in them. Thomas says 3 hours, didn't say a word, just handed me document after document, photographs, blueprints, medical records from facilities that treated conditions we supposedly didn't discover until decades later. Technical specifications for devices that weren't reinvented until the 1950s. He's quiet for a moment. By the end, I understood why the destruction orders existed, not because the materials were dangerous, because they were true. Thomas never filed his verification report. He reassigned from his position. 2 weeks later, he resigned from his position 2 weeks later, citing health concerns. Within a month, his security clearance was revoked. His pension was frozen, and his former colleagues were instructed not to contact him. So, my people, when you find out the truth about something, this system can press a button on you and stop all your money. So let's proceed. He came to Vermont and never leave. The protocol wasn't about hiding the past from the future. He says it was about timing, about controlling when humanity would be allowed to remember. The documents I was supposed to verify destroyed. They weren't unique. They were copies distributed to families like the Harmons across the globe. 54 families, 12 countries, all of them receiving the same materials, all of them instructed to preserve them until they received word that the concealment period was ending. He pulls out his wallet. Inside is a card yellowed with age. On It was a date, 2024. This was given to my supervisor in 1971. The projected end date for the concealment protocol, the year when humanity would supposedly be ready to reintegrate suppressed historical knowledge. He puts the card away. We're past that date now. No word ever came. No authorization to reveal. Either the protocol collapsed or the people who were supposed to send the signal decided we still weren't ready. Thomas has been cataloging the Harmon materials for 48 years. He knows every document, every photograph, every impossible artifact, and he knows what they prove, that Tartaria wasn't a lost civilization destroyed by some catalysm. It was a functioning society that was deliberately, systematically hidden. The buildings are still there, he says. Some of them repurposed, explained away as Victorian excess or gilded age extravagance. The orphan trains, children moved across the country by the thousands, supposedly to find new families. But the records we have show something else. They show children being redistributed, populations being diluted, Tartarian families being broken up and scattered so their collective memory would fragment. His voice hardens. They didn't destroy Tartaria. They couldn't. The infrastructure was too vast, the population too large, the technology too integrated into daily life. So they hid it in plain sight. My people, we live. This is Tartaria. For all those that are hanging in there with me right now, this is Tartaria, okay? It's just called something else. It's Iberia. It's Siberia. It's just called something else. It's renamed. They renamed it, reassigned it, okay? Taught 3 generations that what they were seeing with their own eyes was something other than what it was. He looks at Eleanor, then back at the boxes, and they waited. They're still waiting for humanity to be ready. Whatever that means, you're standing in the main chamber when it happens. 3 weeks into examining the Harmon materials, your hands have been shaking since morning, but you don't know why. Now you do. The documents spread across the table show construction permits from 12 different cities: Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco, Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Atlanta, Denver, Minneapolis, Kansas City, Seattle, Boston. Different cities, different years, different architectural firms on record, but the measurements are identical, not similar identical. Column spacing 7.23 centimeters, doorway height 2.667 centimeters, ceiling vaults 12.19 centimeters, at apex window proportions 1.61 8. The golden ratio in every single building, structural tolerances measured in fractions of centimeters in buildings supposedly designed by different architects in different decades using different materials. The permit dates range from 1871 to 1893. After 1893, the pattern stops as if a switch switch was flipped, as if someone gave an order. Your hands won't stop shaking. You found it. Eleanor says quietly. She's watching you from across the room. The signature, the thing that proves they weren't separate buildings. They were a network, a single unified system built to specifications that shouldn't have been possible with the technology of the time. She comes to stand beside you. My brother spent 30 years looking for that pattern. When he found it, he couldn't sleep for a week. The signature appears in buildings that still exist. Courses, posts, offices, train stations, libraries, city halls. They've been retrofitted, renovated, repurposed, but the bones remain, the proportions remain, the impossible precision remains, and it appears in buildings that don't exist anymore. Eleanor's hands, you, a photograph from the box 23, the St. Dominic Louis World's Fair 1904, temporary structures they claimed built for the exposition demolished after the photograph shows construction methods that don't match temporary foundation piling sunk 40 feet deep. Steel framing visible beneath the ornamental facades, infrastructures for electricity, water, and something else, channels carved into the floor, into patterns. You recognize the same patterns as the walls of this room. They don't build those structures for the fair. Eleanor says they displayed structures that already existed. Then they demolished them afterward and claimed they were temporary, destroyed the evidence while using it as a spectacle. She hands you another photograph. This one is labeled Fair Demolition. December 1904, in the background behind the workers tearing down a massive doomed building, there's a figure in a dark coat watching, supervising, making sure the destruction is complete. There's photographs like this from every major demolition. Eleanor says St. Louis, Chicago after the fire, San Francisco after the earthquake, Atlanta, always the same. Always someone watching, always the same. Dark coats. Her voice drops. They weren't destroying history, they were curating it, removing the pieces that didn't fit the story they wanted to tell, and storing the documentation of what they removed in places like this one. The flashback comes not from traveling, but from documents. Prague, 1891, a letter preserved in box 31, written by a librarian named Joseph Corinne. He describes being visited by a man who spoke Czech, Czech, but didn't move like Czechs. Formal, precise, measured in every gesture. They had a list of books to be removed from the university library, 17 titles, all of them concerning architectural traditions from territories the men called administrative zones. They didn't burn them, corn rights, they boxed them carefully as if the books were precious, as if they were saving them rather than destroying them. When I asked what would happen to them, one of the men said, they will wait until the time is right. Cornuquet was transferred to a rural positioning 3 weeks later. His replacement had no memory of any visits, so they wiped his memory, y'all. The 17 titles disappeared from the library catalog, but the Corinne made copies of his letters, sent them to the family members. One of those copies ended up in this archive preserved for over a century. You're back in the stone chamber. looking at evidence of a pattern that spans continents, buildings with impossible precision, built to identical specifications across thousands of miles, demolitions supervised by figures who appear again and again across decades of photographs, books removed, populations relocated, families scattered, all of it systematic, coordinated, patient, and all of it pointing to the same conclusion. Tartaria wasn't destroyed. It was hidden. It was hidden piece by piece, generation by generation, by people who believed the concealment was temporary. The question is why. They thought they were protecting humanity. Eleanor says, as if reading your thoughts, the people who did the hiding they believe were saving us from knowledge we weren't ready for, technology we would misuse, history that would destabilize the systems they were building. She touches one of the boxes. Whether they were right, that's the question that haunts me. Whether we're ready now, whether we'll ever be ready, or whether we were ready all along. And the hiding was the real crime. Dr. Vera Sokova has been studying the Harman Archive for 7 years. She's 43, Russian at birth, American by circumstance. She lost her university position in 2019 after publishing a paper on anomalous architectural harmonics in 19th century American buildings. The paper didn't mention Tartaria. It didn't have to. The measurements spoke for themselves. I found the signature independently. She says she's sitting in the eastern corner of the archive where afternoon light comes through a narrow ventilation channel. Before I knew this place existed, before I knew anyone else was looking, I thought I was losing my mind. She found it in blueprints, original construction documents from the courses in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Buildings credited to different architects, different construction firms, different funding sources, but the proportional relationships were identical, not similar, not influenced by a common style, mathematically identical to 6 decimal places. Architectural historians dismissed it as coincidence, she says, or influence, or the natural convergence of classical proportional systems. But I am a physicist by training. I know what mathematical signatures look like, and these buildings share something that can't be explained by influence. They share something that can only be explained by a common template, a master plan. Her career ended when she refused to retract the paper. The journal withdrew publication under pressure. Her department received complaints from donors. Within 6 months, her funding was gone. Her tenure track was closed, and her colleagues were advised not to collaborate with her. So you see how the system will turn on you? That's when Tarnas found me, she says. He'd been tracking academics who stumbled into the pattern, waiting to see who would persist, who would keep looking even after the consequences started. She came to the archive in winter 2020. The pandemic had just begun. She drove 22 hours straight, sleeping in her car, living off gas station food. When she finally saw the documents, the photographs, the measurements, the evidence of systematic concealment, she cried for 3 hours. I thought I was alone, she says. I thought I was the only person who could see what was right in front of us. Buildings that don't match their official histories, infrastructure that predates its supposed construction, technology that appears, disappears, and reappears decades later as invention. She pauses. Her eyes are wet. but her voice is steady. I wasn't alone. There have always been others, families like the Harmons, researchers like me, people who saw the pattern and refused to look away. We've just been kept separate, isolated, made to feel like we're crazy, each of us alone with evidence nobody else would believe. Vera has cataloged over 300 buildings that bear the Tartarian signature, buildings that still stand in cities across North America, um, co- um, concourses, libraries, municipal buildings, train stations, churches, all of them credit to architects who left no other evidence of having designed anything remotely similar. All of them built with techniques that official history says weren't available at the time. The cover story is that these were demonstration of wealth. She says, Gilded Age excess, Robert Barron showing off, but that explanation doesn't survive scrutiny. The precision required to build these structures exceeds what was supposedly possible with 1880s technology. The materials came from quarries that have no records of such large shipments. The labor force appears in no census, no payroll records, no immigration documentation. She pulls out the photograph of a building in Detroit, massive limestone facade, columns that taper with perfect mathematical curves, windows arranged in patterns that create precise acoustic properties when the wind passes through. The building was officially constructed in 1890, she says, but the foundation stones show withering patterns consistent with at least 50 additional years of exposure. The construction permits appeared after the building was photographed as already standing. The architect created with the design was 23 years old and had never worked on anything larger than a residential renovation. She sets the photograph down. They weren't building, they were claiming, attaching names to structures that already existed, creating paper trails that explain the inexplicable. And when the explanations became too complicated, they demolished. They called it urban renewal, progress, modernization, but they were erasing evidence. Vera has spent 7 years in this archive. She's mapped the signature across 12 countries. She's traced the pattern of concealment through 4 generations, bureaucratic records, and she's come to the conclusion that she's quietly, as if afraid that the walls might be listening. The hiding was never meant to be permanent. She says the documents make that clear. There are references to the revelation date, to the reintegration protocol, to when humanity archives sufficient maturity. This is a lot, my people. This is a lot. The people who orchestrated the concealment, whoever they believed they were postponing, not preventing. They believed they would come a time when everything could be revealed. She looks around the archive at the boxes that have waited for 77 years. I think that time has passed. I think we missed it. And now we have it. Decided for ourselves whether humanity is ready because the people who were supposed to make the decision are gone. The documentation from St. Bay that executed and the Bureau and did Lewis is different from the rest, clearer, more complete, as if whoever preserved it wanted to make absolutely certain that this particular evidence survived. The World's Fair of 1904 was supposed to celebrate the centennial of the Louisiana Purchase. 20 million visitors over 7 months, 500 buildings covering 00 acres, the largest Exposition in American history. The official narrative says that these structures were temporarily built for the fair, demolished after. Plaster over wooden frames, facades without substance. The photographs tell a different story. Eleanor hands you images from box 15. So, my people, you can get into this and get into this. This shit is so fucking deep. You know, you know, this is all the worlds. This is everything is right here on this earth. So, it goes on into 1912. It shows the fairgrounds with notations marking which structures were demolished in the 1912. Then they go into the 1980s. This is a lot. So when you know where you really are, and now we're in came to Vermont in 2019 to help with restoration work on the archives exterior. He's 57, spent 30 years in construction. So now we in the year 2019. Okay, they're here talking about Tartaria, because this is Tartaria. I'm not going to read all of this, my people, because it's a lot. But, the history is here for anybody to see. You can wake up. You can understand where you really are. Understand it for real. Understand where you really are, my people. You're in a place that has always been. There has never been a time when we were not, because we always have been. We were always here. We will always be here. We are recycled souls. 1890, 1904, 1947. Tartaria wasn't just a civilization. It wasn't just cities and technology and infrastructure. It was different relationship with what's possible, a different understanding of physics, consciousness, and energy. The buildings don't just have impossible precision, they have impossible function. They resonate, they communicate. They're part of a system we don't have language to describe. You hear him, take a breath. So you see, nature was one with the people. So, I don't know what to tell y'all. This is the United States private enterprise free state. In on the check on. Let me see if I can get to the end to give you a brief little summary of what's going on here. What's up, Jason Newton? How you doing? You don't need a comment, nigga. All you doing is listening to history. So the question remains, my people, the waiting continues or ends depending on what happens next. So basically, this is Tartaria. This is Siberia. This is all the ancient places that you could ever think of. It's here, right here, now, today. But the only thing is that it's just been refaced, renamed. That's it. So you can get with this or you can get with that. But I would get with this because true history is where it's at. Stay up, stay one, stay strong, and I'm out.